I will be showing you how to go from this to this. I will be comparing and benchmarking each major setting for graphics and performance differences so you can better optimize the game for your system. And I will be giving you my optimized settings as well. On a Ryzen 5 3600X in a CPU intensive scene with CPU heavy settings, it appears that this game starts to bottleneck at around the 70 FPS mark. Interestingly, the CPU is only around 40 to 50% utilization. It looks like the average FPS isn't really an issue. However, the 1% lows are the main issue here, as it sits around the 30 to 40 FPS mark. There's lots of micro stuttering going on. Going more in depth and looking at each thread utilization reveals the problem. It looks like there is an uneven utilization between the threads at any given time. Around a couple of threads are being heavily utilized at a peak of around 70% utilization, and the rest are just chilling at around 20 to 50% utilization. What this all means to me is that the game is not fully utilizing the CPU, and therefore it's leading to lower than desired frame rates, especially the 1% lows. This is an even bigger problem than I originally thought, because the 1% lows have the same abysmal frame rates even in other areas where they shouldn't, like in this open field. It just doesn't make any sense right now. The whole game has very low 1% frame rates, no matter what's going on screen. So, if you have a CPU with similar performance, keep this in mind, because you won't be getting a smooth and silky experience, at least right now. Now let's get into the settings, starting with the aspect ratio, where this setting allows a wider screen image to scale down to the standard 16:9 display. In my opinion, 21:9 looks absolutely perfect for this type of game, and 32:9 is overkill. For upscaling, using DLSS quality gets rid of the major aliasing and shimmering issues plaguing this game. Then comes FSR 3.0, which still has some trouble dealing with shimmering, and XeSS looks very similar to FSR 3, but a lot blurrier. As for the particle effects, in this scene DLSS handles them very well, while FSR 3 almost entirely eliminates them, and XeSS does a better job than FSR 3 for sure, on par with DLSS in this aspect. For testing out the dynamic resolution scaling, let's get the baseline performance first, which is around the 40 FPS mark. Setting a 60 FPS target with DLAA as a base, the game easily stays around 60 FPS, but has some fluctuations. There are dips and rises. The dips, I assume, are because of the lackluster CPU utilization issues as shown before, and the rises seem to be from the implementation of this setting. It doesn't feel that great as it is. So let's use a 60 FPS cap through the RivaTuner statistics server, and with that, the result is perfect, except for the occasional micro stutters because of the low 1% frame rates caused by the game's disappointing CPU optimization. So if your CPU can handle a specific frame rate, for example 60 FPS, but your GPU can't keep up all the time, I highly recommend using dynamic resolution scaling in this game. The anti-aliasing setting offers a lot of options. SMAA is outdated and shouldn't even be implemented anymore. SMAA T2X isn't up to the task. TAA is what you would expect, but shimmering is still easily visible. DLAA is just perfect. FSR 3 native AA comes very close to DLAA, but has slight shimmering. XeSS native AA doesn't do a good job of dealing with jaggies. If you intend to use native AA, go with DLAA if you have an RTX GPU. Otherwise, use FSR 3 native AA because it looks almost as good as the LAA. This is the first game that supports native FSR3 frame generation without requiring the FSR3 upscaler, meaning you can now use the FSR3 frame generation part with any upscaler or no upscaler. So, how good is it? The baseline FPS was around 60 FPS, and with it enabled, the frame rate jumped to 80 to 90 FPS, which is way lower than we're used to in other games. It feels okay, so nothing out of the ordinary. However, the artifacts are noticeable during gameplay, especially around the character. In its current state, I don't recommend using frame generation. This is not the best implementation out there. The motion blur slider allows you to choose a value from 0 to 100, and it looks nice in this game, and the performance cost is almost non-existent. The textures in this game are not scalable at all, meaning you probably won't notice the difference between the lowest and highest options. Where I did find this setting to have an impact is on some rocks and trees, and even then the difference was very hard to spot. Most of the objects in this game aren't affected by the texture quality setting. The texture filtering setting has a very minor effect on some objects and textures. The terrain, for example, isn't affected by this setting, so it has a very minor impact to image quality. The shadow quality setting is the most impactful in the game, both in terms of image quality and performance. Each option incrementally increases the resolution and distance of shadows. In some scenes, this can have an even bigger impact than usual. Keep this on high for the best balance, and only increase it if you have some performance to spare. The level of detail is the most important setting to the game's presentation. Anything below high is a disservice to yourself and the game. While very high looks the best, its impact is not worth it. So keep this setting on high, and use very high if you have some performance to spare. The terrain detail on medium starts to add some bumpiness to the textures, and high increases its range and quality. Keep this on high as it has a big impact on the visuals, plus its impact is negligible. The volumetric fog in this game mainly controls the light rays that can be seen through the fog. Each step further increases the fog quality and the easier it becomes to spot the light rays. However, it's very subtle and the performance impact is noticeable. Keep this on medium since you won't really be noticing the light rays during gameplay anyway. From what I could tell, depth of field is only implemented in cutscenes, and the performance of all the options is negligible. Keep this on very high for the best image quality as you have nothing to lose here. Screen space reflections in Ghost of Tsushima aren't of the highest quality, as even with the highest option, the reflections still look low res. There is a small performance impact with very high, but it's worth it. Screen space shadows, once enabled, adds lots of details to the world, especially the leaves on the ground, which can be found almost everywhere in this game. However, on low, in some instances, the shading under these leaves can look quite rough. This can be alleviated by using higher options, which also improves the look of these small shadows and their softness. For ambient occlusion, using SSAO performance and quality introduces haloing around objects, and they don't look that good either. HBAO Plus looks a lot more detailed, but isn't entirely accurate, while XEGTAO looks surprisingly better and more detailed than HBAO Plus, and they all perform around the same as well. The water caustic setting is almost missable. You have to look at a very specific downwards angle, and even then, it's very hard to spot. It has a small performance impact, but only when looking at it. This game can be a lot more demanding than it looks, considering it came out originally for the PS4 back in 2020, which is 4 years ago now. But thankfully, going from the max settings to the optimized settings with native DLAA, we've gained a lot of performance back, almost double the FPS. We've also lowered VRAM by 1GB, and using DLSS quality, the gains are even better, going from an average of around 45 FPS to 64 FPS. However, the 1% lows stayed the same, again likely because of the game's CPU underutilization issue. Just look at the CPU utilization. At over 60 FPS average, it's just using 30% of the CPU, and the 1% low is around 36 FPS, which is the same on both DLAA and DLSS. This is unacceptable for a PC port made by Nixies. Someone sent them this video so they are aware of the problem with this port, so they can start working on it as soon as possible. Keeping in mind their track record, I am confident they will improve the game's performance through updates, which I will be covering on the channel to know for sure. This is definitely not their best port. They are held at a higher standard in the PC gaming community and should have delivered a better finished product.